I want to move into the next step, which this is going to be one of my favorite parts of this conversation, which is the development of the survey items and pre-testing.
Yeah.
Take us through how you guys have done that or do that.
Yeah. So at this point, we have sort of a sense of our models. That is, how we think the world works in this particular space. We also do try to figure out a lot of the confounds, right? So what might be underlying these effects that makes it look like there's a relationship when there really isn't. So, I don't know, an example might be organization size. They might be more likely to do something because of a large organization, and maybe they're more likely to have, I don't know, a better software delivery performance. This isn't true. This is just an example, but right, that could make it look like there's a connection between the technical practice and that high software delivery performance when it's not really there. And if we don't have that confound, we report it and people say, look at this, and it's actually not really there kind of thing. It just so happens those two, the practice and the outcome, are listening to the same thing, organizational performance. So we try to capture these confounds before we do the survey, because if we don't have them in our data, we can't account for them, and then we're likely to give biased results. And maybe sometimes my only goal is to prevent us from being very wrong and make us sort of more likely to be right than wrong. But yeah, the operationalization part is sort of what happens here too. So we have all these concepts that are really hazy. And like you mentioned, the literature might not have a set of survey items that you could just grab and run with, right? Like trunk-based development or something like that. There might not be a set of survey questions that you can learn from just reading a couple articles. And this is sort of the more artistic component of research, I think, is when you take a concept and you say, how in the world would I figure out how to measure this concept? What's indicative of this concept being present in the world kind of thing? What does it mean for someone to be burnt out? What would I ask somebody? If I had 3 questions I could ask you to figure out if you're burnt out, what would I say? What would I ask that groups together and captures what it means to be burnt out? Or a technical practice. If I really wanted to figure out what loosely coupled teams looks like, what would I ask you to figure out if your team was contingent on a bunch of other teams? So we go through with a bunch of subject matter experts in the particular constructs and say, pretty much ask them just that. What would you ask somebody to figure this out? I'll give you 3 questions to diagnose whether somebody, not like as a medical thing, but to figure out if this is happening on this person's team. And we go through that process. Inevitably, they generate like 700 questions. The pre-testing then sort of happens. And that's where we're trying to figure out these extremely technical concepts. Does anybody know what we're talking about? Especially if we're trying to have a broader audience of not just the 75 people who are experts in this kind of thing. We want to have everybody who takes the survey should be able to at least say, I don't know, or something like that to this. So we go through the pre-testing where we're just really trying to make sure, is our survey way too long? And we're trying to make that better all the time, but that's an uphill battle that we're always working on. Last year we got it under 15 minutes. This year we're going for 10 minutes. No one likes me for doing that, but I would rather have good data and a little bit than a lot of data and it's all bad kind of thing, because the person's like, what are you making me answer 75 questions for? So is it a decent length? Can they comprehend these questions? What's the cognitive load look like? When we ask them a question, they might understand it, but are they able to, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, retrieve relevant memories about organizational performance? Like what are their memories that they're drawing on to answer this question, right? And then the way they would naturally answer it, do our answer choices capture the way they would naturally answer it? Because they might say their answer naturally might look very different than like the 7 answer choices we give them. And at the end of the day, we have a few questions at the end of the survey and the pretest, just about how easy it was to take the survey, how much effort they had to put into it. And we try to get that below a certain bar to make sure we can put it out there and not make people really dislike us for the survey and drop off, of course.
Well, you definitely sound like a trained psychologist to me. in terms of describing the the pre-testing process and what you look for. I think that that's so important to call out. Like you mentioned, cognitive load,
Yeah.
and comprehension, and the ability to recall and actually map to a response, and whether those responses are appropriate, and whether that response actually meets the objectives of the item that you're designing.